Hey everyone, it's Lydia Crafts here. Thanks so much for joining us. This is my Community Coming Together series. I'm running for the Maine House of Representatives here in District 90. I'm excited to be here with you today. I just wanted to share a few campaign updates and give you a little bit of information about what's been happening lately. So as you know, we are coming up on a July 14th primary. I'm excited for this. It's been pushed back from June. And this gives us all an opportunity as candidates to meet with more folks, talk to voters, and see what your concerns are. So in preparation for that, I really want to encourage everyone to request an absentee ballot. We want to make sure that every vote counts and that everyone stays safe on July 14th. It's really easy. Head on over to lydiacrafts.com. You can find a link there to register. They'll start sending out ballots in mid-June. And it's a simple, easy process. So that's one thing. The other is I am really proud of another state Senate candidate, Sarah Green, who has organized a Memorial Day tribute. It's a moment of silence at 3 p.m. on Monday to honor the sacrifice of our lost heroes. If you feel so inclined to send a message of gratitude, post it on social media, share it publicly. We want to make sure that there's a chance to really honor the sacrifice of folks, and we don't have Memorial Day parades this year, so there won't be the same visibility. Quick introduction about myself if you're new to this series and to my campaign. I live here in Newcastle. I am a clinical social worker and work down at the Bristol Consolidated School with my husband Kevin, who's also a science teacher there. Our girls attend school at Bristol, or did before the pandemic. My stepdaughter Amelia is just heading into high school, and my daughter Kestrel is entering kindergarten this year. My family and my children are a big reason why I'm running for office, because I see a lot of young working families in our area who are really committed to living here and really want jobs and a stable future for themselves and their children. And I think this is a really important investment that we can make as a community to keep all of our services strong, to make and value really what is already here and what's happening to ensure a really safe and secure future for all of us. So last week I was excited to talk about food insecurity. We had Meg Taft from Good Shepherd Food Bank and Twin Villages Food Bank Farm. We also had Karen Kleinkopf from Farms at the Y, and we talked about what it looked like for families living with food insecurity and elders and individuals. This week, I really wanted to talk a little bit more about local agriculture. And I think that that plays an important role in how we talk about food security and insecurity. And it's a really vital and important piece of our local economy. So in doing that, I've invited Alex Beaudet. Here, I'm gonna split our screen. Hey, Alex. So Alex runs Pemaquid Falls Farm in Pemaquid, just down the road from the Bristol School. Welcome, Alex. Can you just introduce yourself a little bit about your farm?
Yeah, hey Lydia, thanks for putting this together. So yeah, I own Pemaquid Falls Farm. It's a diversified vegetable farm at the mouth of the Pemaquid River in Bristol, and I grow vegetables, fruit, flowers, and I raise hens on pasture for eggs. And I sell through. I have a CSA, an on-site farm store. I sell to some local restaurants, and then this year, kind of due to the pandemic, I started a sort of a weekly online farmers market. So all purchases are online right now, and pickup is curbside at the farm.
Great. And how many seasons have you been growing for?
So this will be the third or fourth full-time season. It goes by quick. So
yeah. And how did you first, 3 years ago, what made you jump into farming?
So I always, like, my mom and grandmother always had big gardens. So even as a kid, I guess I always kind of helped out. But I went off to school and got an engineering degree and kind of I worked for a few it was in software. So I worked for some startups, and then I worked at a big corporate job for a few years, and it was kind of brutal and unfulfilling. And I ended up moving to Maine, and I guess I got introduced to some local farmers. I lived in Montreal for a long time. There's a big food scene there, kind of famous farmers markets. And so I guess through food and through kind of like environmental issues, I kind of got interested, and then made a bunch of friends in the farming world, and kind of rolled from there. So
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting. So when you were working in your engineering job, that was out of state. Is that right?
yeah, I traveled a lot. It was like consulting mostly. So I was, traveling 4 days a week and then in a city for the fifth day, but it was very sort of unsustainable. I think like environmentally for my, mental well-being, it was sort of a drain. And yeah, I just thought there would be something, more fulfilling out there for me. So
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of us who live here in rural communities in Maine find that we're drawn here partly for the lifestyle
yeah, for sure.
that the natural environment and like the pace and the work ethic and what happens here in our community is really appealing and often very different from what you're describing as kind of that corporate world, climbing the ladder. Um,
Yeah. And it's funny because I think like in that in that sort of world, everybody thinks of themselves as like workaholics. But I mean, here, I mean, the people I know here, I mean, people here work 10 times harder than anyone I ever knew in that world. So it's a very different situation, but it's one, I'm not going to get rich from farming, but yeah, I feel like things have a lot more meaning, and there's definitely a lot more fulfillment in what I'm doing now. So
Yeah, I recently read the quote, we want to be able to work where we live rather than live where we work.
yeah, totally.
I think that speaks to me a lot that, to be able to make a life in this place that we want to call home is really important. And it sounds like you're working really hard to do that in a new and very different way
Yeah,
than previously.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So when I finished college, I moved out west and I started a small scale organic vegetable farm. Also, we were about 5 acres, and it was amazing to me. I just wanted to sort of connect with that comment you made about the farming community, that when you start a farm or when you're in local agriculture, there's a really strong network. And I'd
Yeah.
love to hear kind of what that's like in this area in Lincoln County. I mean, I know MAFCA is a huge part of that network, but sort of what is it like in your relationships with local farmers around this area?
Yeah, I think I would say for the most part, everybody was really sort of welcoming. I think early on, when people knew this was the direction I was heading, they always sort of let me come work on their farm if I wanted to, or like volunteer, let me kind of pester them for information. Mafka has been invaluable, like connecting me with people who have become mentors. I'm in the Journey Person program now, so that's been really great. Yeah, and I think there's a strong network, and for the most part, everybody's super welcoming, and yeah, I feel really fortunate to be farming here, especially too. It's like it's relatively spaced out here, but land's expensive, and it's sort of amazing in Lincoln County alone just how many small farms we have that are like vegetable farms, dairy farms, meat farms, seafood farms. There's a ton of people doing value added stuff. So just in a really small area, there's a lot of people growing really great food. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just jump in. You mentioned about land, and I think that's a crucial aspect from kind of the policy and public policy piece around preserving farmland and how important that is, especially in communities where there's a lot of development. And while I don't think our rate of development matches that of Southern Maine. It's still, when we have a lot of coastal shoreline, and
yeah,
we're certainly down there on the Bristol Peninsula where it's a super sought after area of the state. So I think it's really important that we have organizations. I know the Maine Farmland Trust, that there are initiatives around helping farmers preserve land so that we're not losing our agricultural spaces to more residential development.
yeah, yeah. Maine Farmland Trust, it's awesome what they're doing, and there are other organizations around doing sort of similar things, but I sort of my like eventual hope is on like a more local level, at least here in Bristol. Just from talking to other towns, like there are some things I think we could do. It'd be nice if we had sort of they've been talking about doing a new comprehensive plan for Bristol. I think it'd be great if we kind of revisited the minimum lot sizes. Sort of like wetland development has been something that I feel like hasn't been given a lot of consideration. I think I've heard about people trying to start a conservation committee in town, which would be, I think, really wonderful, because it's very quickly becoming very hard to find any amount of land around here.
Yeah.
Just having friends who have been leasing land for a long time, they're looking to buy. And I mean, they've been looking for a couple of years in this area, and it's tough.
And I think that's really common. I mean, that's what we did out in Washington State when I
Yeah.
started, was like, you don't jump in with a huge cash flow. And so there's
No.
really not that availability of purchasing land. And so you do want to lease, but I think that there's an instability there, that you don't have the security of long-term commitment to a piece of land.
Yeah.
And when you are farming, it really is, decades of time to make sure that you're treating the land well and
Yeah.
able to continue to grow from it. So I think I know Lands for Maine's Future, they've preserved a ton of coastal working waterfront properties along with agricultural land. And I think that's a super important initiative and one of my priorities in Augusta, to make sure that we're preserving some of that natural resource that makes people want to be here. And
Yeah,
I think
totally.
produce and grown close to home is an important piece of that. You mentioned the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of how you adjusted to an online marketplace? I know you've been pulling in products from different producers. How did that sort of take form or take shape?
Yeah, it's sort of, so the season for me doesn't usually start until probably around Memorial Day, kind of even early June sometimes, depending on the weather. But this year I was getting so many people asking, like, just sort of as soon as news broke that, there's this worldwide pandemic going on, I start getting flooded with emails saying, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? When's this going to be ready?
What were people looking for? What did people want?
The kind of, I still don't fully understand it, but like there's been this crazy rush on eggs, and you see it everywhere. Like nationwide, there's been this huge rush on eggs, but pretty much any local food, people were asking, do you have greens? Do you have, like, when's this or that, the other thing going to be ready? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I understand people don't always fully understand when things are prepared, but I mean, I was having people ask, like, when will you have tomatoes? And it was March.
It's going to be a while for tomatoes,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So, so I just sort of teamed up with some local farms and started bringing their products here. And I guess, partly because I have some, like software development know-how, put together this online market. So I think I'm, working with 20 or 30 other farms now. And I work with the butcher in town, the Riverside Butcher in Damariscotta, and like Morning Dew and 30 Acre and Straws Farm. And I mean, everybody's pretty much within driving distance. So it's,
and that's a great connection you just made around sort of that skill set that you can market your products online. And, we were talking about internet broadband expansion and how important that is, being able to give folks the tools when things change suddenly, which they did this year, and it's assumed that they will continue to change, as things always do, moving forward, that you have that flexibility and can sort of shift your business model to adjust to, because I imagine your scale is smaller being in a rural community, and so every sale, every individual product that you're selling has a significant portion of your week or your month's income, and so being able to adjust quickly is really important.
And I think one thing that when I started this, it's when you asked about what got me into farming, I think one of the coolest things about farms is everywhere. Before I started this, I went to pretty much everywhere I traveled. I was stopping in to check out other farms and talk to those people. And one thing I kept noticing is how farms in rural spaces became like community centers. And you get a lot of people meeting up there, a lot of people just like hanging out to talk. And that in the back of my mind, like the Pemaquid Peninsula can be a little isolating. There's not a ton happening down here. And I've always sort of like a long-term goal is to kind of become a community hub. And I think like this was the pandemic, I think it's been cool to see how it's brought out the best in people. And I was really blown away because I actually had people, I had just opened up CSA signups and then this happened. And I actually had people asking, what my capacity was because they wanted to start buying shares for people who couldn't afford them.
Wow.
And it was like really, I mean, I just showed up one day and there were like checks on my doorstep, and it just said, this is a CSA share for someone in need. And that felt really good to kind of see like the community aspect of farming come together around this. And it made me think of it when you said the broadband thing, because, it's another aspect to it. There's a wealthy section to town, but there's an underprivileged section to town too. And I think making, healthy, nutritious food available to more people is really important to me. And hopefully something that you can help out with.
Yeah. And I think you're not alone in being, a small business owner who really cares about making sure that, right, that injustice or those folks who are going without are really seen and heard. And I think there are plenty of people in our own community who are thinking about that already, right? Like offering to buy CSA shares, wanting to make sure that we can get food into folks' hands who may not have easy access or the financial means to do so.
Totally.
It's huge, and it's a really important piece of, I think, like that social fabric of our community. And that we often think of like, oh, we're rural, we're spread out, but there are these ways that we come together and really look out for each other. And I think, it happens every day, but specifically right now during this pandemic, folks are seeing it a lot more, and there's a lot more visibility to it. I know a lot of people have been, purchasing, I've seen a lot of social media posts about like coffee through the drive-through, like buying the person's coffee behind you. It happens on all different levels, whatever we're able to do. And that's really important. And I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think like, I'm like semi-politically involved. And I think one of the things that doesn't get brought up enough is how it's weird to say, but it's very expensive to be poor. And not having access to healthy food from a young age, it has a lot of really expensive consequences down the line. So I think for me, it's always sort of been important to make, I'll never turn somebody away because they can't afford food, but just to make sure that I'm doing whatever I can to get more healthy food to people in this town is
that's really admirable. And I think also helps folks who do have the financial means to know that when we're investing in a small business, that part of our money is going towards that social responsibility. That our business, you don't see, I don't want to name names, but you don't see large scale distributors doing a lot of this. And so I think that's a big difference. There's some strong contrast there of how we look out for our neighbors, and whether it's supporting the boosters team at the school or, the fundraisers or individuals who are in need of some food. I think it's so important.
MAFCA puts on a conference every year, the Farmer to Farmer conference. And at one of the talks last year, I want to say it was Taryn from Sheepshead General, who's in Whitefield, who said that there was a study in Maine that invest or spending money in small independent local businesses in Maine, that somewhere around, it was like 50 or 60% of that money in the secondary round of spending is spent within the community. And for chain stores or large distributors or whoever it may be, it was like 10%. So it was like 5 times the amount of money stays in the community when you are investing in small businesses. So
it's so important. And it's I think illustrating that and helping people see that is so important, because for anyone who's financially conscious, just not wanting to overspend or wanting to budget and make sure that you have some financial security is important. But I think that you can see some small ways, some small actions you can take for a pretty small price difference go a long way in our own community.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Talking about that, it makes, I guess there's a couple of questions. I'll stop. Local schools access produce. I know that the Twin Villages Food Bank Farm talked about working with GSB. Is that something that you have interest in doing, bringing people or volunteers to your farm?
Yeah, totally. I had some volunteer labor lined up for this season, and things sort of have changed abruptly. But yeah, I'd love to work with GSB or Lincoln Academy. And I don't know about like Bristol Consolidated, but I know Lincoln Academy, like the chef there, he makes an effort to buy local food when they can, and they have programs for affordable meals for students. So I think there is that stuff happening, but I'd love to be part of seeing more of that happen.
That's
sure.
great. Yeah, this Maine Senate President Troy Jackson helped write some legislation, and it did pass Mainers Feeding Mainers, and it's a state policy around funding local schools accessing local produce from farms. And I don't know a ton about how schools access that funding, but I think that that's a great example of policy work that has a good impact on student nutrition and supports local farms.
Yeah, I think the other funny thing too is like I'm in my early 30s and a lot of friends have kids now. And I remember being a kid and there were certain things I didn't want to eat. And then you taste something like from a farm or from a garden and you're like, wow, I actually like this. And even now I see my friends' kids, like they'll turn away whatever, a carrot that's from the grocery store. They don't want it. And then they come here and, you just pick it fresh. It's like, at its peak. And you see like their face light up, like the first time they ate like a real strawberry. It's like, and I think the more we can, give access to really great tasting, nutritious food to young kids, develop those habits early. I think it's, a gateway to sort of like a healthier eating style. But
Absolutely. And I think they say introducing a kid to something 16 times or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's behavior change. So
Yeah.
there's a great value, even if the first few times they're not takers. I know we got raw milk from Strauss Farm through you last week, and we had a taste test at home, and the kids were astonished at the difference. Like you can taste the grass.
The grass, yeah.
It's
it's crazy.
incredible.
Yeah, I know.
So not all products are the same. And I think there really is that nutritional component of food that's grown right here and has not lost some of its vitality in transit. So that's great. You mentioned labor and volunteers. I'm wondering what's your farm model been like? Have you done it all on your own? What type of help do you have?
Yeah, for now it's just me. I guess I'm managing it by keeping it really small. I'm really only about a half acre right now. I'm very fortunate. I have family who lives down the road essentially, and they're happy to help out when they have time. So, apart from that labor, it's really just been me. But, this season, as things have grown, I'm sort of reaching that point where I'm like, all right, next year it's, I can't really imagine being able to get any bigger without hiring somebody. So that's definitely something I'm kind of actively looking into, but for now it's just me.
That's great. Yeah, I think what you just mentioned about having family nearby, I think that's a big reason why a lot of folks decide to stay here when they've grown up here or move when there are parents or grandparents in the area.
Yeah.
And to me, that really plays into the affordable housing, right? That when we move here as young adults or come back home, that when you've been established and are slightly older, you may have more financial means, but that purchasing a home or finding an affordable rental or any rental at all, affordable or not, it's really, really tough in this area.
It's very difficult. And it's one of the things that's tricky about hiring is apart from land, it's the most expensive thing you're going to spend money on. And I think one of the things I've struggled with is I'm not like fully versed on all of the like Department of Labor laws. So this is just my understanding is for agriculture, there are exemptions. And by providing, other things like, free food or housing or all these, peripheral things, you can pay people less.
Mhm.
And for me, I think if I'm not able to pay somebody a living wage, then I wouldn't be comfortable hiring them. And I think if I, need those people and the business can't survive without not paying people enough, then sort of my personal view is maybe that business isn't necessarily viable. And
Yeah, I think.
that's, yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not a judgment really on small businesses that choose to go that way, or small farms, but are like the big agriculture in this country sort of like sustains itself on exploited labor
And federal
uh,
subsidies.
and and subsidies. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was looking for. And I really do. I think it's like, if you took those away, the food that everyone's grown accustomed to like always having access to, and it's so cheap, like that would get very expensive. And it's interesting because like small farms in Maine are making it work, paying people well, and our prices really aren't that much higher than like Hannaford,
Mhm.
because we're skipping so many steps in distribution, and frankly, like I think people are pretty efficient out here.
Yeah, and it's so much about relationships.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
building those business relationships. Yeah, I know. It's interesting that you mentioned the labor issues, because Bill Pluker from Hatchet Farm over
Yeah,
in Warren, he's a representative,
yeah.
and I have a lot of respect for he and Reba and their farm, and they do an awesome apprenticeship program. And
Oh, yeah,
I know that some of the constituents in his district really took issue with him supporting minimum wage laws around, we're at $12 an hour, but what it looked like when it came down to his apprentices was different. And I think that there has to be a very clear differentiation between regular hourly wages and
yeah.
what it looks like to train young farmers, because I
Sure.
think the program that they run bring in relatively younger people who are committed and eager to farm, and give them a really clear skill set that, and there was a letter to the editor, I think this came out last summer or last fall, from all of the local farmers. Sarah Cawthorn at Twin Villages Food Bank Farm was one of the co-authors, and they're all running their own successful farms now. So
Yeah,
I think there's, right, you kind of walk that line of, I have a lot of respect for what you're saying around supporting a livable wage, because that's really important, and that there's also kind of vocational training, and not all farms do that, and
yeah.
for the farms that do, they can do it well, and that's sort of part of that reimbursement, or what they're
Yeah,
actually.
I think there's a huge difference between like straight labor and apprenticeships. I think the apprenticeship programs are great. I think I sort of was at like a stage in my life where I wish I had apprenticed. I sort of volunteered places and kind of worked for friends here and there, but I wish I had done a formal apprenticeship program. I think there are people who think we should like get rid of them.
Mhm.
And to me, it's crazy. That like, I'm just thinking of one farm off the top of my head. You know, they give like a monthly stipend. It's like $1,000. They pay for housing. It's sort of unlimited food, and you're getting trained. Presumably for something that you might do with the rest of your life. In those situations, the hourly wage might not work out to, you know, $12 an hour in
Right.
Maine. But if that young person is willing to, work for those, and I think the combined, if you value the food and you value the housing and you put dollar signs on these things, it's worth more than what that minimum wage would
Yeah,
be.
certainly. And it does. I mean, I apprenticed at the Poughkeepsie Farm Project down in New York
Oh
before
yeah.
moving out to Washington, and could not have, I could not have jumped into it on my own without
Yeah.
the skills I had. So I think it's an important conversation, and in a state where we need to be holding on to youth and attracting young working people, finding the
Yeah.
models that work, and making sure that it's really clear what we're describing and defining as apprenticeships, and what falls into just farm labor. I've had both experiences, and I'll tell you that general farm labor for minimum wage is like a
Yeah.
very different experience. And like that farmer, it's about production. It's not about
Yeah.
teaching and learning and
Yeah.
skill development.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think there are, yeah, I think it's pretty clear to me the difference in that. So that is
Yeah.
interesting.
And I think Mafka, they just said the other day, I forget where I was reading it, that they have over 100 new apprentices coming to Maine farms, like through their apprenticeship program every year. And it's like, if we start turning away, swaths of these people, I think it would be detrimental, like you said, to like, the youth population in Maine, but like the small farming community. Those are future small farms.
Yeah.
We need more of.
I was reading some of the statistics about the loss of farmers, and there are a couple of demographics, female farmers are on the increase, but that the average age of farmers in Maine is like in their late 50s. So bringing in more, but they did talk about like the significant increase in retail sales and direct sales to consumers by local small scale farms is increasing. And so you see that demand, and in order to meet that demand, we really have to have models available to produce, and that supply side needs to be there. So I think it's awesome that we have so many farms in the area, and that we need to support it as a state, especially.
Yeah, I think there's some, like, it's one of the toughest things that I struggle with, at least when it comes to that. It's like that relationship of people to food, and sort of rethinking the way we teach either kids or people generally about where food comes from. And it's sort of like everyone has come to expect that any kind of food they want is available year round, and it should be cheap. And when you look at like the sort of like the globalized model of agriculture, it's it's very damaging. And I think if you think about the miles that the food goes, when you think about the fact that like most of the food you're buying in a grocery store, it was picked when it wasn't ripe for transportation, and then like gassed with ethylene to make it look ripe. There's a relationship we need to kind of teach people, that local food, it might not always be exactly what you want when you want it, but that for the sustainability of our food system, I think more small farms are the way to go. And it's funny because this pandemic, you're seeing this stuff in the news where it's like, the food system is breaking. Like, what are we going to do if like all these meat processing plants shut down? It's like small farmers are stepping up. And I haven't seen anybody saying like, oh, we can't supply our local food system. They're just saying like, oh, there's more demand and we're meeting it.
Yeah, the food system has to adjust to it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, right, you touched on nutrition, which is huge and important for like long-term health of our human community, but also this idea of like climate change and land preservation, and industrial agriculture takes a huge toll on our physical land and what is farmable. And I think that we have this fake security system of federal subsidies, of this reliance on mass quantities, that when we take into the toll the transportation and reliance on the fuel industry and what that really looks like for our overall health, I think it's really clear that there's a huge pocket and space in our state and our country for supporting local farms. And I think that that's really shifted. I mean, just talking or listening to Shelley Pingree and her push for supporting local farms and decreasing waste of foods, and looking at the state level, like food shaming and making sure that children aren't going hungry, it seems to be there. And then, those things existed prior to this, but also this pandemic, like the first thing that people talked about was feeding children, and that children in our communities, in our state and at the national level, rely on 2 meals a day from public schools. And that's a huge concern, that many children, and therefore also adults, are living with food insecurity. I mean, we have to look at the risks and the failures of our national food system and say, how can we step up and meet those needs locally?
No, I think it's all true. And I don't know, I remember like seeing in the news at some point, it was like they're reclassifying like pizza as a vegetable so they can get it onto like more school menus. And it's like, I think I think focusing on local distribution, particularly to young people, would be super impactful
Yeah.
on a lot of things. And it's not just people's health, but like you were saying, it's, I mean, the environmental impact of big agriculture. It's, I mean, they drain wetlands to grow more corn, to grow more soy. They destroy habitats. And I think a lot of small farms are moving towards like the person who's sort of like my farming mentor. Like he thinks of his farm as like ecologically focused. They're trying to like sequester more carbon by like doing no tillage. Kind of like I've started building these like native plant hedgerows with like houses for bluebirds and
Right. Animal
sort of,
habitat is a huge one. Mhm.
yeah. And it's like I have this piece of property is not ideal. Like there's wetlands and it's like, sure, could I like drain them? Definitely. But like you lose all this biodiversity and yeah, there's huge environmental impacts from the way like we've traditionally been farming in this country. And I think the conversation, like you said, just needs to change.
Yeah. Well, I will just say that I think you're doing a great job creating a community hub. I know
Oh, thanks.
the chickens out front.
Yeah.
My daughter loves to come and visit, and it's a great feeling of bringing folks together. And when I stopped by last week, I saw people coming by like, "Hey, how do we do this? When can we order?" So for folks who want more information, can you just share your information now, and then I'll also add it to the comments so people can find you.
Yeah, sure. So the best bet is probably the website. It's pemaquidfallsfarm.com. The way I mostly keep in touch is through the email newsletter. So you can sign up for that on the website. And then other than that, I post updates to Instagram and Facebook, semi-frequently. It's just at Pemaquid Falls Farm on
Great. And
all
your
the.
mailing list, your online marketplace, Wednesday mornings, 10 a.m. you open, and then
Yep.
pickup is Saturday afternoon.
Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think like, it's everyone I talk to is struggling with this, but I'm playing it safe, I guess, in terms of people's safety. So hopefully we will be able to go back. Normally I'm open like 5 days a week and you can kind of stop in whenever, but for now it's ordering Wednesdays and Thursdays, pick up Saturday, but
Great. And
hopefully.
you can pay online and you just
Yep.
bring the stuff right out to the car. So
Yeah,
there's
we'll put that in your car. Yep.
great. Oh,
Yep.
excellent. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm
Oh,
really
thank
excited
you,
to
Lydia.
be able to chat and have a good weekend and a great growing season.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
So thank you everyone for joining us. If you have more questions for Alex, please don't hesitate to contact him at Pemaquid Falls Farm. And please consider following me and my mailing list. You can join by visiting lydiacrafts.com and make sure you request your absentee ballot. Follow the link at the top of my website. We have a July 14th primary, and happy Memorial Day to everyone. And we'll see you next week. We're going to talk with Larry Seidlinger from Yankee Transport and Karen Ann Hagar from the Y and talk about the Lincoln County Food Initiative. Thanks so much and have a great weekend.